we're mesmerized by competition, right? If you think about how many things in our world are competitive, we are so competitive. We want to know who won. We want to know how we can win. I was searching recently this week in preparation for this. I was searching top 10 lists. There are millions of top 10 lists out there. Craziest things, too. Like, people rank everything. Everything. What's the top 10 this? The top 10 this. And have you ever noticed that when someone says, they were second place, or they were number 2, what do we always want to know? Well, what was number 1? He got second place. Well, who won? Second place just doesn't seem good enough. We always want first. We always want to win. There are top 10 lists. If any sports fans out there, there's greatest of all time arguments, right? I mean, you hear it all the time. We want to compare athletes now to an athlete 40 years ago. It's a complete waste of time, but we will sit there and argue about it. We'll do that over music. Oh, who's the best band of all time? Oh man, it's got to be this group from back in the 60s. They're the best of all time. And we'll actually spend energy arguing about this. And this isn't new to our society. Even in Scripture, we see the disciples argued about who would get to sit at the best seat. Who would get to be at the right hand of Jesus? Who gets to sit on the throne right next to God? And they would have these arguments. And today is week 3, the final week of a series on love. But I'm actually going to talk about love next week also. But this is the final on 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And as we've seen the last 2 weeks, the people were arguing about what the best and greatest spiritual gifts were. Which ones are the best, Paul? Which ones are the most effective, Paul? Which ones are the ones that make other people go, wow, he's got that gift? And he's got that gift? And they would argue about which one was the best. And Paul gives us an answer at the very beginning of chapter 13, actually the end of chapter 12, and at the very end of chapter 13. See, in chapter 12, he's talking about the spiritual gifts, and here's what they are, and here's why they're important. And he starts out right before chapter 13 starts, and he says, "Yet I will show you the most excellent way." And at the end of chapter 13, in verse 13, he says, "And these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love." As we talked last week, this is what love does. And I'm going to change the verbiage just a little bit to make it a little bit more understandable. See, true love gives others time to grow. True love treats others with kindness. True love desires the best for others. True love doesn't keep score. True love gives others the benefit of the doubt. True love shines on the best in others rather than shining on their weaknesses. True love cherishes the truth and hates what is evil. True love never gives up. And now it's nice, we can learn this, we can recite this, we can have this up in our head, but how do we actually live this, right? Because that's really the question. How do we actually live this love that Paul's talking about? It all sounds good. It all makes sense. But when it comes right down to it, how do I actually live this? And at the end of last week, I said, I just gave you 3 short little things that help us live this kind of love. It comes as a result of daily yielding to God, continually confronting our selfishness, and regularly practicing biblical love. Again, it's easier said than done. But see, Paul gives us in verses 8 through 13, actually starting back in verse 4 too, Paul says it's all about having the right perspective. See, everything in life is really, if we really want to learn it, we need to have the right perspective. We need to have context, we need to understand, and we need to know, how do I need to think about this? Because if I can think about it the right way, then I can actually live it out the right way as well. So as I've done the last 3 weeks, I'm going to read all of chapter 13. If you're able, willing, interested, would you stand? Chapter 13 says this. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. Even if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And then Paul says something that we'll talk about. He says, love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these 3 remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. So in verses 1 through 3, Paul shows us the preeminence of love, how love is so important. It's the foundation of everything. He says these gifts that I'm talking about in chapter 12 and then again in chapter 14, they're worthless if love is not the foundation. So they're arguing about what's the best, what's going to make me look good, which one do I want, as if they can choose which gifts they get. And he says, hang on. This is all about love, people. In verses 4 through 7, he shows us the practice of love. And this is what we talked about last week. That love is an action, it's not an idea. He says this is what love looks like in verses 4 through 7. It's patient, kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, and it goes on and on and on. This is what love looks like in real life. And then in verses 8 through 13, he shows us the permanence of love. The permanence of love. So in verses 8 through 10, starting out in verse 8, he says, love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. See, love is never failing. Now, here's the problem. This is what we run into. We go, now wait a second. I've been in love before, and it failed. So how can Paul say that love never fails? And then we try to convince ourselves that, well, maybe I never really was in love. If it failed, then maybe I was never in love. Or we say, I know I was in love and it failed. So this whole thing that Paul's talking about, this must be a farce. How is it that love can never fail? Because, failure and disappointment is a part of life. Unfortunately, friendships become sour. Sometimes churches split. Marriages end. Disappointment happens. We screw up and lose the big game. But see, when Paul said love never fails, he wasn't saying that love will always have success. Now listen to that. This is important. Paul wasn't saying that love never fails. He's saying that it will always have success. John MacArthur says the following. I want you to hear this. If you want to write it down later, I can show you my notes here. All right. Love is not a magic key that Christians use to unlock every opportunity and guarantee every endeavor. Love is not a spiritual formula that, when fully applied, automatically fills our desires and produces human success. Love does not always win, but no godly work can be accomplished without love. Listen to those last two sentences. Because when we hear love never fails, we automatically go to love wins. But Paul's not saying that. He's not saying that love always wins. Love does not always win, but no godly work can be accomplished without love. And there's a big difference in that perspective. So love is never failing, not in the sense that it wins all the time, but in the sense that if God is truly at work and is going to accomplish something, love will always be a part of it. Hang with me. Because part of understanding success is having a clear understanding of who determines that success and how they measure that success. And of course, we as followers of Christ should be believing that it's God who determines this success and that it's God who determines and gets to decide how that success is measured. I coach some baseball teams. And it is really easy for me to get caught up in this one little at-bat, or one inning, or one game, where we go, oh my goodness, we lost the game. Oh, he struck out. Oh, he walked 4 batters and walked in all of these runs. And we go, what a failure. I failed as a coach. But see, that's taking success on a little microscopic level instead of seeing the big picture. What does the season look like? What does this kid look like 5 years from now? What if the success wasn't in that he became a great hitter or a great pitcher, but that he had a great experience for 3 years and it spurred him on to other successes? See, Paul says as a child does not see the big picture. And neither do we often when it comes to love's enduring quality. Does anybody have kids here who you try to convince them that what they are wearing is not going to be sufficient for the weather that they are about to encounter? Anyone? This happens in our house all the time. You're going to be cold. No, I'm not. I walked out onto the deck and I felt it and I was fine. And so Amy and I have just kind of got ready to go, okay, but I don't want to hear it later on. Sure enough, Friday night, Amy and the kids were going to the Eudora football game. Lucy comes out in these yoga pant things. I still don't understand you women, but coffee and yoga pants. It's a great combination, apparently. I'm kidding. Wear whatever you want. I don't care. I don't even know what I'm wearing half the time. So she comes out in these yoga pant things, and Lucy, you're going to be cold. No, I'm not. I got pants on. You're going to be cold. No, I'm not. I've got pants on. Okay. Go ahead. She was cold, right? Yeah, she was cold. The great thing about Lucy is she just goes, yeah, I was cold. But see, she doesn't see the big picture. We've been through it before. We understand that this is what happens. You leave your house thinking I'm dressed warmly enough. And then you get there and you go, oh my goodness, I didn't wear enough clothing. So I'm going to take too much so that if I do get cold, but if I get hot, I can take it off. But see, Lucy's a child. And she thinks like a child. She doesn't see the big picture. And Paul says, people, us, you don't see the big picture of love. You don't see what God's doing. We're like children. We're like children, and we see what we want to see. We see what we think we see, and God's going, I've been there before. I know what I'm doing. I know what's going to happen here. I just need you to keep loving. Keep going. Your kids ever been doing something and you turn to your spouse and go, well, this isn't going to end well? You know it's not going to end well, but you know if you try to stop it, it's not going to go over well either. So you just kind of go, well, they might as well learn something. And it never ends well. But see, we parents see something that our kids don't see. Paul says, he says that it's like looking in a mirror. This perspective, it's like looking into a mirror. My pages keep moving on me. Must be some air. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Paul says our perspective is so limited. It's like looking into a mirror and thinking, oh, that must be what I look like. Now, today, we can do this, but for the Corinthians, which, did you know that Corinth was considered like the mirror capital of that area? That's a weird thing. That could be a top 10 list. Top 10 places that mirrors were produced. But Corinth was that, but their mirrors weren't like our mirrors today. They would take metal, sheets of metal, and they would polish these sheets of metal, and they'd go, see, this is what you look like. Can you imagine looking into a piece of polished metal and going, oh, that's what I look like? Really, all you're going to see is kind of an outline of yourself, maybe a few features. But Paul says this perspective of love is similar to you looking into a mirror, a polished metal mirror, and going, oh, now I see clearly. Paul goes, no, you don't. You don't see clearly. That mirror is not a clear representation of what you really look like. And Paul says that's how our perspective on love and of God often is. Our perspective is limited. Our arguments are often petty. We tend to see the world revolving around us. But Paul says there will be a day when we will grow up. We will one day understand. The problem is we often love or don't thinking we already understand, thinking we already get it, thinking it's already clear to us. Love is always winning. I know that sounds contradictory to what I said earlier. But Paul says that when all is said and done, faith, hope, and love will still be here. And instead of focusing on other factors, our focus should be on that which will ultimately remain, and that will be love. So real briefly, I know it's getting late. Paul says these spiritual gifts that you're arguing about are going to go away. There's going to come a time where it's going to pass away. It's not going to be useful. Then he says, these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. How can love be better than faith? I've grown up hearing about faith. I've grown up hearing about hope. When things ultimately become clear to us, and we assume that Paul was talking about when we're standing in the presence of God. When all is said and done and we're standing in the presence of God, faith is no longer needed. Hope is no longer needed. When we're standing in the presence of God, faith is fulfilled, hope is fulfilled, but one thing will still remain. You will still have this desire to love your Creator, and your Creator to love you. And for you to love the people around you, and for the people around you to love you. So Paul says that's the one enduring thing. So why not start to get good at it now? Could we look past the elementary, the childish, and purely concrete things and look to that which is spiritual, holy, and eternal? So real briefly, what does this look like? I'm just going to give you 5 things to think about. What if instead of merely learning about love, what if we actually practiced and demonstrate love? See, a lot of us like to learn about love in Scripture, or even worse, we like to learn about love by what goes on around us or what we see around us. But what if we put our love into practice and actually demonstrate it? What if, instead of claiming to be followers of Christ who are led by the Spirit, we actually showed that we're being transformed into Christ likeness? See, we like to claim that we follow Christ. We like to claim we're led by the Spirit, but it's often our inability or lack of interest in loving His ways that make others go, wait a second. I don't think these two things quite go together. What if, instead of running after human formulas and fixes, what if we focused on how God's Word directs us to respond? See, oftentimes when we fail in our love, it's because we've responded in a way that isn't loving. What if instead of focusing only on what we can see when life gets difficult, what if we focus on the fact that God has a plan and a purpose? This is essentially what Paul's saying when he says you don't see everything. You're like a child, and it's no offense, but we're all kind of like children here, thinking we've got this figured out, we know what to do. Oh, I don't need warm clothes. And God's going, I Trust me. I know. I know. And our love often fails in those little moments where we just go, I'm tired of this. I'm just going to stick it to him real quick. Or I'm going to respond this way because they deserve it. What if instead of trying to win in this life, we realize that those victories are temporary, but love is eternal? That's what we do. We try to win, right? We want to win these relationships. We want to win that battle. We want to win. We want to be right. What if instead of trying to win, instead of trying to be right, we realize that those victories are temporary? They don't mean a thing, but that it's actually love that is eternal.